unexplainable the amount of times that I tried to quit and I couldn't. But once I like called out to God and screamed to God, help me with this, like sudden people started showing up.
I'm John Sturkenberg. This is my wife, Susan.
We lost our son, Greg, about 4 years ago. We each bring a different perspective. We lost Greg and walked through that addiction process with him for quite a long time before that happened. And now we're walking through it from a very different perspective.
And I'm Deb Hilbolt. And it just seems my whole life has been impacted with some type of addiction or substance abuse from many family members. My mother, my brother-in-law, my husband, my son. Started as a child for me. You know, as a child, you're very confused. And especially back in the 1960s and 70s, it was, I don't want to say unheard of, but it was definitely swept under the rug. Mm-hmm. And so there was great shame. People didn't understand it. And of course, we're still just learning about it. But I have felt at times you go, okay, God, what am I supposed to do with all of this? And why me? Why multiple generations, multiple family members? And maybe at the time you can't see it, but looking back, it's okay. Somebody was walking with me the whole time. I just didn't realize it. People will say, well, how do you do it? How do you have the strength? How can you put up with that? Yeah. Well, you can't. You know, you get your peace and your strength from your faith in God, because he's holding you up, even if you don't know it.
I'm Chris Hauser. I grew up a mile from here. Fantastic parents, still married to this day. Christian, we were involved in church. I was a top student athlete in high school, and alcohol just slowly started to weave its web into my life. I'm sober over 4 years now. Looking back with clarity at the way it weaved its way into my life, it was a weekend thing in high school, and then it was college where it was more and more regular, and then after college, like, it determined where I worked. I still serve and wait tables because I was able to stay out till 2 in the morning, and then I didn't have to get up at 7 to go to work. And where I lived, I moved to Florida, so I could just go, like, be there, and I knew I could, like, just kind of let the addiction win. The thing is, I consider myself a Christian throughout all of this, but I couldn't overcome the addiction. It had invaded every area of my life to the point where I didn't even know why I was choosing to do certain things, because alcohol was really a master decision maker in my life. Fought it for many different times where I can't tell you. I mean, think about how many raindrops. That's how many times I said, I'm not going to drink anymore. I mean, I said that over and over and over again. I would say it to myself every morning when I'd wake up on my way to work, like, I'm not going to drink tonight. And then the night would come and I'd be at a bar. I never know if I was going to be on the other side of it. I'm so grateful that I am.
I'm Matt McClellan. My story isn't too much unlike yours. I grew up in the church. My parents were always involved. For me, it was just like a slow turn in my teenage years. My dad's job took us out to Ohio, and I moved away from everything that I had known and loved here in Pennsylvania and fell in with the most accepting crowd out there. Started smoking pot with all the potheads. And from there, with kind of my own decision of I'll try anything once type of an attitude, it just led me down the road of one thing after another. What really set it off was I was given painkillers by a doctor after my wisdom teeth were taken out, and that was a whole new level for me. I just loved the way that those made me feel, made me less motivated to care about more and more things at that point. I started using people for what I wanted. It led to other drugs. I went to rehab. I was called a garbage head because I would search for anything that would take me out of where I am right here, right now, today. So I tried all the synthetic drugs and eventually back to painkillers, and eventually painkillers were too much, so heroin came into play, and luckily that wasn't too long before God called me out of it. I'd probably been doing heroin for about 6 months before God finally woke me up Thanksgiving of 2014 and said, I feel like I heard him say to me, this isn't the life that I had for you. This isn't where ultimately I want you to end up. There's something on the other side. So he gave me that hope. He gave me that calling. And early on, I did it with my church surrounding me, my family surrounding me. But I eventually realized that I needed to do it with other people who had kind of seen the same things that I had seen. That's when I found Celebrate Recovery. Really from there, my prayer was just, God, use me. Use this shame that I felt, the hurt that I felt, and not only the hurt that I felt, but the hurt that I caused to other people. Use that in a glorifying way, however that is. And he continues to be faithful in that and continue to give me opportunities to talk about it. My hope is that it gives other people hope, that there is something on the other side of it. There were some fellowships I was a part of that it was like the leaders of the meeting would say, well, I've been sober for 40 years and every day is a struggle. And I said, I don't want that. why am I going to pursue sobriety for 40 years and it to still be a struggle? But at Celebrate Recovery, I saw people that were truly happy, that were truly experiencing a healing. So that's the hope that I found. And on whatever venue I'm allowed to, I talk about it, wherever God prompts me to.
One of the things that you said there towards the end was something in AA that I experienced. I had a really positive experience initially in there, and I spoke, and I really started to understand why I was doing some of the things that I was doing. I had to reinvent who I was because I looked in the mirror and I was disgusted with who I was. And I wanted to be a different person. I had to make decisions based on, I wanted to be the best family member I could be. And in order to do that, alcohol wasn't going to be in that equation. So, and now I want to be the best father I can be. And there's certain things that I can't do if that's who I am, that's what I want to be. There's certain things I can't do. There's a lot of people that are still struggling on a daily basis with sobriety. I'm not one of them. And I'm so thankful for that. God has lifted that from me. And I just don't struggle with it on a daily basis, that the way that some people do. And I wasn't going to live in that environment where I want to have a drink today. I don't. I never want to have a drink again, because God is in the center of my life and God has lifted that from me. Because I've chosen to follow him. It's amazing. It's unexplainable the amount of times that I tried to quit and I couldn't. But once I called out to God and screamed at God, help me with this, sudden people started showing up. And
I was struggling with my son, and I just remember every day going to work, I'd pray. I drive 45 minutes a day, so there was lots of time there to do that. Overall, nothing was happening. We tried different things. We'd go to different counselors. We'd talk to him, try to understand what was going on. And I'll be very frank with you. I didn't, even though I came from an alcoholic family, my dad was an alcoholic. Opioids and heroin are nothing like that in the sense of how you deal with getting somebody away from it. Because I went to AA when I was a kid with my dad to try to get him off of it. Great people trying to do their best to kind of get away from it. But again, there's a will, there's a desire, there's something that has to come from you inside when you're in that program. Because the program is just nothing but trying to help you through the day, making sure that if you need help, there's somebody there. You talked about kind of feeling bad about yourself. The things I've read on that is the alcohol, you might feel better in a year, 18 months. You might start feeling good about yourself. You get down to opioids, they're talking 3-5 years before you think people will accept you. It's a disease. If you've never been exposed to it, like we weren't, but we are now, we know inside and out that our son was our son. It's that monster that had him,
Right.
that controlled him.
Yeah.
And he just wasn't strong enough to get to where Matt is, where Chris is. He did try as best he could, but I never knew the depth that he'd have to go through to get out of it.
The rear view mirror, and the now you guys know so much you didn't know then, and just the parental aspect of wanting to protect your children from the landmines of life. I mean, because I think the unspoken story, I think sometimes in addiction is there's the inner circle of the addiction, then there's the onion like outer circles and stuff, and all of that stuff somehow is intertwined. The woulda, coulda, shoulda and stuff, that's uniquely something that you feel. Is that, how much of a ghost is that? Or is there freedom from that? Because I think a lot of parents feel that. In fact, I know for a fact that my parents feel that.
Yeah.
What is that like? What does that feel like?
I know I've talked to people who are in that boat who wish they would have done something different. Fortunately for us, because we spent, I'm going to say, 5 years with trying to deal with it. And I can tell you how many counselors we went through and how many counselors were basically, I mean, you go to one counselor, you get one message. You go to another counselor, you get a different message. The only one that really helped him was when he went to rehab. There was a woman, her name was Susan, I think it was. Sue, who was an addict, who was a counselor, and she knew how to deal with him. She knew when he was telling her, giving her a line and, you know, trying to get what he wanted. She could tell. She just was so good at really helping him. This is the tough part. When I was taking him to school the last time I took him there, he told me, "Dad, I need to get a hold of Sue." I knew the counselor he had was not working and he was in trouble. I just couldn't get a hold of her at that time. That was a week before he died.
I can also echo as a parent. You said you struggled for 5 years. We're still like in this 10-year. It's it's a long, long journey. You guys know it doesn't happen overnight. It's step by step. Kids are really, really good at hiding and tricking you because as a parent, you want to think the best of your kids. You know them from tiny on up, and you think you know that core. You know who they are, why they're making decisions. So you want to believe the best of them, but they're really, really good at manipulating and lying. Finding that help. Yeah. You're so right. We went through many counselors, many therapists, several rehabs, and it's tough. It's a real tough journey. It's a thing that has a grip. You guys, I'm sure you would admit, you didn't do it on your own because God was with you. God, you had your Heavenly Father helping you. But it was up to you to make that decision. As parents, or as children of parents, or as in-laws, we can't do that. So it's tough. It's a really, really hard place to be.
I would love to know, what were some of the things that you started to observe and notice, knowing that it was like this bright spot, this path to follow?
I still get signs from God. Sometimes God will give me some kind of sign when I'm in a place to know that I'm at the right place at the right time. And when I first started getting sober, I had to change the music I listened to because some of the music was driving my behavior. I listened to rap music my whole life. So I changed and I started to listen to Christian music. And one of the first songs I was listening to was Oceans by Hillsong United. When I came to this church, what came on? It's just like different things were just happening. And he placed the right people in my life to help me. And you said that monster. That is one thing that I learned about myself is I had a monster inside of me that was really like controlling things. Yeah. And I had to understand that monster in order to overcome it.
That's interesting.
That monster used to be so big within inside of me. And, I guess it would never leave, but I mean, he's this dot in the table. He's no problem to me anymore.
You just said you have to know that monster to overcome it, but that might be counterintuitive in the moment. Is the gut reaction you're trying to avoid that monster, I guess, in the moment? So it's like turn around and facing
I had to learn about me, about who I really was. A common excuse in alcohol is my thing is like, oh, I was drunk. Like, that's still me. I'm my person during the day, but at 12:30 when I'm highly intoxicated, oh, I was drunk. From someone who's never dealt with it, is like, oh, well, that's you the whole time. It's almost like you're two different people. Like, oh, why would you do that? Well, I was drunk. It's an excuse. Well, like, I had to learn it. Like, I'm responsible and accountable for everything that's within my life. Like, it's not okay because you were drunk. Like, that's still you.
Mm-hmm. I got to tell you guys, the encouraging thing for me every time I have conversations like this is when you believe what we believe, which is a faith of redemption. It struck my mind when you said that it took a certain counselor, and that counselor had to have like skin in the game. When I was interviewing you, I used the word special forces because I have a military background. I know Matt well. We're friends. And there's things that Matt can do to right the wrong in this world or to bring hope to this world that are out of my reach. God can use him uniquely as a conduit. There's such hope in that. Everybody keeps it hush hush, and people with addiction and stuff, that's the opposite of what God would want, because it's when you speak about it that he can use those compatibilities, because everybody's instinct in our society is to like pull the drapes, keep it on.
I think that can give the devil a foothold when we say that, you know, that's not something we're going to talk about in church because we're just going to wear our Sunday best and we're all going to come in here. We're going to look proper, we're going to act proper, and nothing happens during the week that's out of the order. People will come in broken. People will come in hurting. People will come in stinking from the night before. And they're going to feel like they're the only ones that are going through this. Everybody else has their life together. What am I doing here?
Well, you know, it's fascinating you say that, because I was sharing with Deb, you know, when we first started talking about this back in the spring, I had so many people from here that actually emailed me and said, nobody knows this, but, right? And then they shared. And I was just blown away by the fact that they can be coming here and they felt so lonely.
You know, the sweeping under the rug business. I have a friend that says, and this is so powerful, silence kills. If we don't talk about it, if we don't make people aware, if we don't share your experiences and your success and your faith, how it got you through, what's the point? What's the point of everything? My goodness, it's our responsibility to reach out. Even if it makes people feel uncomfortable.
It's going to.
It's going to.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And I know this, it's going to, and it's a lot easier to ignore it.
You know, I have a very successful father, a very successful sister, a very successful brother, and they all tried to help me. They're intelligent people. They did nothing for me. It's like, it'd be like me coming to you and say, let's build a rocket ship.
That's a good analogy.
You can't.
Right.
You can try for 20 years, but you're probably not going to build a rocket ship.
Exactly how we felt too. We just felt like every time, like we would look at him, like we could tell some of the words were going in, and we could see the pain and the anguish that he knew that the whole situation was causing, that he was feeling inside. But it's like we were like talking Greek or Latin, or like it just was not helping.
Not penetrating.
And there were times when both of us either kept ourselves going because one was ready to give up versus the other one was ready to give up. So we had to support each other. Well, she supported me because there were times we both were like, and I'm like, hey, how do I deal with this? And she said, don't make the mistake that I made. Because I'm living it every day, that if I'd have stepped in instead of walking away, I wouldn't be carrying the blame, looking behind the mirror and saying, you know, if I'd have done something. So with that said, it wouldn't have been for her. I may have had issues looking through that mirror, but I think both of us feel we did everything under
You laid it
our
down.
We didn't understand the opioids. I don't think anybody really understood it until the last couple of years and how powerful that was. And the other thing I've learned is that people that have, you know, like ADHD or something like that are more prone to it. So there are people more susceptible to doing it once and they're hooked. There are other people that can do it
Right.
Times.
Inherent randomness, but there probably isn't.
You
But we
have
just
no
don't know
idea
enough.
which
Some
one
are
that
just
you
wired
are.
more.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, for that.
You know, I think the important thing is not to give up. You got to, you know, and you know it's a disease. So it's something, would you just give up because somebody has cancer? No.
Right.
You wouldn't. You know, somebody's got to step up and talk about it because you don't want the kids coming up to go through this stuff and the parents to be in the position we are today. So if we do nothing, that's what's going to happen.
One of my brothers is struggling with addiction in and out of rehab. There's a debate among us all the time as to whether we're enabling. It's all just a whole bunch of just like
Yeah.
trying to deal with something you don't understand.
We
And
were
it's
all over the
laced
map.
in
Just
ignorance.
share from our perspective.
Yeah.
But-
And-
So I'd kind of like to speak to that.
yeah, go
Because
ahead.
that's a real issue in our family. You know, there were some, I'll call them the hardliners. Well, kick them out. You know, don't help anymore because then they're on their own. And I have to say, I mean, family and friends, and I'm sure your parents went through this, but I just kept coming back to that word, love.
Hmm.
What would love look like?
Mhm.
What would love do? You know, I just didn't want to give up hope, even though, don't get me wrong, I mean, there were many times I was in the depths of despair. And you just want to wash your hands of it because it's like you've tried this, and talked and talked and talked. And you think they hear you, and then 5 minutes later, kaboom. But that's the disease. I have to hang in there with love. Love is the only thing that will get that healing.
It's a
So
gift to
true.
some extent too that in general mothers
Mm.
have like more at the end of the
This
day.
will
My
never give
mom
up.
was so
Yeah.
is and is so
Never give
faithful.
up.
But I'll confess this. I love my brother, but I also love my mother. So I would get filled with anger
Mhm.
that my mother was taking such an emotional beat down. So then now I found my heart is like growing in like straight up anger towards my brother. It has nothing to do with the addiction. It has to do with my mother now.
Yeah.
So it's like splintering off to
Very
many
good.
different levels. It could be treating my mother like this for any reason. It just so happens to be the addiction. And I'm still going to be just as angry with her. So this thing now has like 4 or 5
Yeah.
dimensions to it. For my brother who's in the grips of addiction, what is his perspective on all that?
Mhm.
Is that like not even on his
Oh,
radar?
Well, I know
Or
from our perspective, Greg, all you had to do was look at him. He knew. He
already knows
saw.
all that. It's
He
just like salting the
knew.
wound.
He knew the pain that was being caused. But that's the addiction. And so again, I think we had talked about this too. It was for me similar, like I love him. And so I had to separate out the addiction and that behavior from who I knew he truly was and just keep loving him through it.
I'd like you guys to talk to that.
I mean, I can say very assuredly for me, straight off the bat, if my mom wouldn't have stood beside me and she would have abandoned me, I wouldn't be here. So more power to the moms who stood beside and didn't just give up and wash their hands. I talk to parents about it all the time. Ultimately, it comes down to a personal decision. Y'all can't want it enough for us to become clean. Y'all can't send us to the most beautiful rehabs in the corners of the earth and expect us to come back and get clean unless we ultimately want to do it and we have that personal decision that this is the way I'm going to change my life. And it's going to be in that better way of giving whatever up it was that was killing us. A lot of times we can't even see that. During it, I couldn't see that it was me. You know, I tried to get clean for my kids. I tried to get clean for my wife. I tried to get clean for my mother. But it all came back to selfishness on my part. I kept falling into that trap of thinking, you know, this isn't affecting them. I'm gonna do it. This isn't affecting them until it was, you know, until I was using rent payments and having my mom bail me out, until I stole my kids' savings, until I stole my mother's jewelry, you know, it wasn't affecting them until it did, and it was. My mother also had critics that came by and said, "What are you doing? Why is he still living at your house? Why why are you still enabling in that way? And she found that grace, which at the time was completely unwarranted. But it's really, in the end, what pulled me out of that. And it was a personal decision initially that pulled me out of it. But then if I would have pulled myself out of that, and I look around and nobody else is standing beside me, then what? Who is going to walk alongside me? Then who is going to support me? Because I made this decision. But just because I made this decision doesn't mean that times aren't going to get hard, doesn't mean that I'm not going to be approached, doesn't mean that, there aren't going to be billboards about alcohol on my way to work. There are. And it's in those times that we need people still standing around us, still crowded around us, to pray, to be there to talk, to, console us. And even if it's not in the, I've walked those same paths you've walked, but I'm here to love you. I'm here to listen. I'm here to talk.
Yeah.
The song went wild in Christendom, but it's that reckless love song.
Oh.
And it makes, when I look at my mother, I on a regular, I'm like, this defies common sense. This defies logic. And if you're in a court of law and the one side is making the case against my mother doing this, and the other side, the one side wins every time. But it's a reckless love. It's very indicative. It's very much like Jesus' love, which makes absolutely no sense, totally unjustified, but faithful, 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 faithful. So in a weird way, addiction and all the spokes of the wheel that we're talking about, what a wonderful testimony of our faith in its three-dimensional form, which is reckless love, defiant love, love through the end, through the darkest of places. It lays over what we believe so beautifully in a weird way.
Just to give you both a little bit of reprieve, you are not responsible for the decisions of another person. You're not. Yeah. So whether you cut them off or you enable them, you're not responsible. Yeah. It's their decisions and that led them there. And like, my parents aren't responsible for the decisions that I was making. And my dad couldn't decide for me to stop drinking. Mm-hmm. And they were fantastic throughout. I could always go home. And I know I'll be the same way with my child. She'll always be able to come home. There's no blueprint.
That is very true, because all of us are individuals, different families, run differently, and there's so many personalities.
So many factors.
Yeah.
And you have to take that burden off you, because you aren't the problem solver for this.
Well, I think that's the power of grace, right? Because when we realize that we can't do it, that you have to have
give it over.
somebody.
And that's why my child's name is Grace.
Isn't that wonderful?
My life isn't perfect. It's far from it, and it's never going to be. I don't think any of our lives will be. But when I made the decision to really follow God, I got baptized and just started to live a different life than what I was living. Just always had this premonition I was going to have a daughter, and without God's grace coming in my life, she wouldn't have ever seen. Because I would have never had a child because of my addiction. I didn't want to drink and have a child because I knew I couldn't be the father that a child would have deserved.
It makes me wonder, you read these headlines and you talk to these people and you see, even on this just a pure math statistic side of things, how opioids addiction is just ravaging neighborhoods and the country at large. Because I saw the numbers come in from the Northeast, and it was something like 1 out of every 4 families or something staggering like that. High. All you have to do is just put something else into place. 1 out of every 4 families gets hit by a car. 1 of every 4 families gets HIV or something. These are staggering numbers, right? First thing I felt was, how am I this oblivious to something that's hitting 1 in 4 families? But the second thing I thought is there any chance that from a refiner's fire like this, the Lord is doing something in our country, bringing us to our knees? The people that come through this, they don't have milk toasty faiths anymore. They don't have like lukewarm faith. They either have abandoned faith. I have seen that.
Right. Yeah.
Or they fall into His grace, which is what we just got done talking about.
Yeah.
If those 1 in 4 families fell into his grace, that will be a revival to end all revivals.
Mhm.
It's a weird, like, hopeful thought
It is.
that you have to turn your mind to, and rather than just dwelling in all the pain and suffering of it. So we serve a God that's playing chess in ways we just don't even know what's happening here. You guys have spoke about that so beautifully, about how God brings things into our life, and it's the really just understanding you're not in control of it. But what if on the macro level, in our community, in our nation, our world, it's this weird way of bringing us to our knees, specifically in the West, where we have so much prosperity and so many reasons to think that we're our own gods. If this touches you, you start thinking you're your own God pretty quick.
Yep.
There is hope, regardless of how far deep or lost you are. One thing I say is, like, I was in the fire, I was in there, and I came out. So if I can come out, you can come out too, because I was in there. I didn't think I was ever coming out. I tried countless different ways to get out, and I couldn't get out. I was just in there burning. The ability to be forgiven for what you've done. That's how I got there. I mean, I think that's open to anyone.
There is hope, right? There is hope.
If they're willing to surrender and just realize
They're
it's
willing.
beyond them.
Yeah.
For years, I prayed for helping him get to sobriety and all that other stuff we were hoping. It ended up, he died. I don't look at that as a negative thing. God said, oh, maybe he needs to come to me. I look at that every day and say, he's probably right. He's
So
at a good
even
place.
in the
He's-
ultimate
he's-
loss, you find hope.
Lost a good friend from my recovery group who knew the Lord. It was amazing the hope and the power that his family gave at a celebration of life ceremony that could have been down, could have been funeral like,
Yeah.
but it was a whole flip side to that. It was this is what Brandon struggled with in this life, but God's freed him from that. There was so much hurt and so much pain, and for a decade I went through that hurt and that pain, and God eventually brought me from it. And sometimes the way that He brings people from it is to take them back with Him, and it was so hopeful to hear them say that 3 days after losing their son, and say, we know eventually we'll see Brandon again.
Faith.
Exactly.
And he's dropped those chains now, everything of this world that we all struggle with, because it's not just drugs and alcohol. Every day we struggle with things of this world. Anything that we place before God in our lives is something that we're all struggling with. So to hear them say that and say, God took him home and broke those chains for him. It's so powerful to hear you guys say that again.
Magnificent faith is what it is. It's magnificent faith. I hear you say that doesn't seem like victory. You hear of a family who lost their son. There's no way you imagine them saying that. But the way you described that was a form of victory. It's just powerful.